In the dark depths of the ocean lurked the silent shadows of Japan's naval power. Weapons that could turn the tide of war and send entire ships of fleets into chaos. Their submarines. From launching surprise aerial attacks to sinking enemy ships, join me as we dive into the world of some of the most iconic Japanese submarines, what made them special, and the deadly operations they were involved in. Inspired by Germany's submarine raiding operations during World War I, Japan not only focused on development of their own submarines, but were so successful by World War II, they had some of the most advanced submarines in the world. They also had the most diverse submarine fleet of any nation during the war. They had everything from manned torpedoes to underwater aircraft carriers to giant submarines weighing over 5,000 tons. So, let's check out some of these submarines and see what makes them so special. First are the I-400 class submarines. These bad boys were the largest submarines of World War II. The Japanese Navy was definitely fond of large submarines. During the Second World War, there were only 56 submarines larger than 3,000 tons in the entire world, and 52 of those were Japanese. And yes, size does matter, or at least in this case it does. This large submarine was designed to be a submersible aircraft carrier capable of carrying up to 3 Syrian aircraft underwater. They were equipped with torpedoes for close-range combat and were designed with range to travel anywhere in the world and back without needing to refuel. The I-400 was designed with an engine with over 2,000 horsepower and enough fuel to go around the world. I wish my car could do that. So exactly how large was the I-400? For starters, it weighed over 5,000 tons, and with a length of up to 400 feet, it was longer than a football field. It could dive at a distance of over 300 feet below water and travel at a speed of 19 knots on the surface and 7 knots submerged. It was also equipped with waterproof autocannons for anti-aircraft defense and demagnetization capabilities to defend against magnetic mines. The I-400 was designed shortly after the infamous Pearl Harbor attack by the commander-in-chief of the Japanese Combined Fleet, Isoroku Yamamoto. It was designed to make aerial attacks on cities along the western and eastern coast of the United States using submarine-launched naval aircraft and was completed shortly before the end of the war. The submarines were tasked with 2 notable missions. The first was an attack on the Panama Canal, and the other was an airstrike on U.S. forces at Ulithi Atoll. But because of Japan's deteriorating war situation and eventual surrender, both missions were canceled before they were carried out. The I-400 were large submarines with revolutionary design and long-range capabilities, but for all their versatility, they were introduced too late in the war to have any outstanding achievements and had high resource requirements to build. Despite initial plans to build 18 of these submarines, the Japanese Navy was only able to build 3 by the end of the war. So what next after the biggest submarine? How about something smaller? Much smaller. During World War II, several countries like Germany, Italy, and England used small submarines to stealthily infiltrate shallow harbors and attack ships. The Japanese also employed these tactics in the form of the Type A Ko-Hyoteki, also known as Target A. These submarines were a class of Japanese midget submarines known for their small size and stealth. Their small sizes made it harder for them to be detected and allowed them to stealthily approach enemy fleets. They weighed 47 tons with a length of 78 feet, much smaller than your average submarine. But with a speed of 23 knots surfaced and 19 knots submerged, they were faster than most submarines of their time. However, due to their design, they were unable to dive deeper than 100 meters, and their electric battery-powered engines weren't built for long voyages and had to be carried on larger mother submarines. As a result, they were typically named after their carrier submarines. So a midget carried by an I-20, for instance, would be referred to as an I-20 Tau. They also weren't designed to pack a lot of firepower. Armed with 2 muzzle-loaded torpedoes and 1 scuttling charge, they weren't built for prolonged attacks on the enemy, but short all-or-nothing attacks. So what was it like piloting Target A? For starters, if you happened to find yourself as a crew member on this ship during a mission, chances were you weren't coming back. These ships had notoriously high mortality rates for their crew, as most of these submarines that took part in missions were destroyed. They were usually deployed for one-way missions, not very accurate and difficult to maneuver, and sometimes simply malfunctioned. During the attack on Pearl Harbor, the I-24 Tau malfunctioned due to a faulty gyroscope, lost her way, and ended up grounded on a beach and captured by the US military. Her commanding officer became the first Japanese prisoner of war during the war. Each submarine only had a crew of 2 men, an officer in charge of driving the ship and another to manipulate the valves and move the ballast to control the submarine's dive. As a crewmate on a mission with this submarine, you would have to navigate undetected to your target and hit it with your torpedoes, or use your scuttling charge in a self-destruct strategy to take the enemy down with you. Even if you were lucky enough to be successful in your operation without blowing yourself up due to the battery limitations of this midget submarine, you may not be able to make it back to safety and could only hope for rescue if you aren't sunk or captured by enemy forces. The Target A midget submarines were involved in a handful of missions during the war. The most famous mission was the 1941 Pearl Harbor attack. On the 7th of December 1941, 5 Type A Kohyoteki submarines launched from mother submarines south of Oahu, Hawaii, took part in the attack on Pearl Harbor, and although none managed to return, one of them, the I-22 Tau, managed to launch torpedoes at 2 U.S. battleships, the USS Curtis and the USS Monaghan, just after the air attack started. On the 30th of May 1942, a Target A midget submarine was also responsible for sinking a British tanker and damaging a British battleship, the HMS Ramillies, and put her out of action for a year. Speaking of battleships, this next submarine is famous for the sinking of a U.S. battleship, the USS Indianapolis, which was one of the most significant successes of the Japanese Navy. I am referring to the Japanese I-58 submarine. This behemoth of a submarine was over 350 feet long and weighed over 3,000 tons. But its size wasn't all it had going for it. It had 2 diesel engines with over 4,000 horsepower and 2 electric motors with over 1,000 horsepower for propulsion. It could travel at 17 knots while surfaced and 6 knots while submerged, had a test depth of 100 meters, and could cover long distances. Despite the fact that the submarine only served in the final year of the war, it definitely left its mark, taking part in numerous operations, including the sinking of the Indianapolis battleship, the very ship that was responsible for the delivery of parts and nuclear material for the atomic bombs used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki later. So why was this particular submarine crewed by 94 men and officers so successful? Well, it was designed as a long-range fleet submarine and was built to be able to carry a float-plane aircraft, which was later removed, and 6 Chiton-man torpedoes, a devastating weapon against large ships. The Chiton torpedoes were a unique type of submersible used by the Imperial Japanese Navy. They were a type of suicide craft, a crude torpedo, the underwater equivalent of the infamous kamikaze planes. The basic idea was to have a torpedo driven by a trained pilot who could maneuver the torpedo and make necessary adjustments to hit targets accurately. They were designed to be launched from submarines, ships, or coastal installations for coastal defense. However, despite the high risk of the Chiton, more often than not, they only resulted in the deaths of the pilots without achieving anything significant. But Chiton torpedoes and aircraft weren't all the I-58 was packing. It was also armed with 6 21-inch torpedo tubes, 23 torpedoes, a 140mm gun, and 2 Type 96 25mm guns for anti-aircraft use. After its completion on the 7th of September 1944, command of the submarine was given to Lieutenant Commander Mochisura Hashimoto, who led the vessel and its crew on a number of missions, including the sinking of the Indianapolis. The sinking of the Indianapolis was the most significant war success of the I-58. It was in the middle of the night when Lieutenant Hashimoto and his crew spotted a ship approaching from the east. They submerged and fired a barrage of 6 torpedoes in one go. By 12:27 a.m. on the 30th of July, the USS Indianapolis capsized and sank, resulting in the deaths of hundreds of U.S. sailors, many of whom were reported to have died from shark attacks while awaiting rescue. It was a significant victory for the I-58, but this next submarine sank a lot more submarines. The I-26 Japanese submarine. This 3,000-ton submarine was one of the highest-scoring Japanese submarines in the war in relation to how much tonnage of ships were sunk, and was even the first submarine to sink an American merchant ship in the war. It was a formidable submarine that contributed to some of Japan's early successes on the Pacific battlefield. Just wait till you hear about its exploits during the war. But more on that later. First, let's see what's under the hood. It was comprised on the 6th of November in 1941 and was designed to be a fleet submarine for long-range operations. It weighed over 3,000 tons and had a length of over 300 feet and could move at speeds of 23 knots on the surface and 6 knots while submerged. It could cover a range of up to 26,000 kilometers at 16 knots. It also carried its own seaplane aircraft for reconnaissance. For its firepower, it was packing 6 forward torpedo tubes, 17 torpedoes, and a 140mm deck gun for surface engagements. It definitely had enough firepower to threaten any ship it ran into, and trust me, it did a lot more than just threaten. Shortly after its commission, it started patrolling the area in the Pacific Ocean between San Francisco and Hawaii to observe and report enemy ships. The I-26 submarine ran a stealth operation where it would surface only at night and remain submerged during the daytime. These missions were crucial for gathering intelligence during the early days of Japan's Pacific campaign. The I-26 was a thorn in the side of the Allied forces. One of its early exploits was the torpedoing of the SS President Coolidge, an American troop ship. Although most of the troops were evacuated safely, this attack disrupted American supply lines. But it doesn't stop there, you see. It also damaged the USS Saratoga, one of the largest and most valuable aircraft carriers in the US Pacific Fleet, on the 31st of August, forcing it out of commission for months. Under the command of Minoru Yokota, it sank multiple enemy ships, including the SS Cynthia Olsen on the 7th of December 1941, the SS Coast Trader June 1942, the USS Juno November 1942, and the SS Racina April 1943. While under the command of Toshio Kusaka, the I-26 also sank multiple ships in the Arabian Sea, including the SS Albert Gallatin, the MV Grena, and the SS Richard Hovey. The I-26 was responsible for the sinking of over 51,000 tons of enemy shipping. The I-26 was definitely a threat in the Pacific. Its endurance and long-range capabilities allowed it to travel deep into enemy waters. Its versatile armament of torpedoes and deck gun allowed it to deal with different types of enemy ships, and its ability to launch seaplanes gave it an edge in intelligence gathering and reconnaissance. Its only weaknesses were lack of air cover, which made it vulnerable to the Allied forces' superior air force in the Pacific. As the Allied forces also improved their anti-submarine tactics and countermeasures, the I-26 became more vulnerable to detection and destruction and was eventually sunk. The cause of the sinking is still debatable by historians. Some believe it was sunk in a diving accident, while others believe it was sunk by enemy ships. Next up is perhaps the most iconic submarine to come out of the Japanese Navy, the scourge of the Pacific, the infamous I-19 Japanese submarine. The I-19 is famously known for the most successful torpedo strike in naval history. One volley of 6 torpedo attacks was responsible for sinking 2 major ships and damaging a third so badly that it was out of commission for months, undergoing repairs. This legendary battle demonstrated the effectiveness of Japan's Type 95 torpedoes and the skill of the I-19 crew, commanded by Commander Kanashi Takakazu, who is, in my opinion, perhaps one of the best Japan submarine commanders. Just picture it. You are Commander Kanashu, just hanging out with your crew one afternoon when you detect a US task force. You rally your troops and give orders to your officers while navigating your vessel to get close to the enemy before you launch a barrage of torpedoes at the enemy ship. 2 of your torpedoes hit the enemy ship, damaging it and causing it to sink. But it doesn't stop there because the other torpedoes continue on for miles before hitting 2 more ships, causing one of them to eventually sink. This feat earned Commander Kanashu a promotion and an audience with the Emperor, but more on that later. I'm sure at this point you are curious as to what type of submarine the I-19 is. The I-19 was built by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and designed as a long-range fleet submarine for reconnaissance and combat missions. Launched on September 16, 1939 and completed on April 28, 1941, it was equipped with 6 forward torpedo tubes and 17 Type 95 torpedoes, which were considered among the best torpedoes of the time. It also had a 140mm deck gun for surface combat and carried a float plane for scouting and reconnaissance. It weighed over 2,000 tons and had a length of 356 feet with a speed of 23 knots on the surface and 8 knots while submerged. While in operation, it had quite an impressive record. It was commanded by 3 different commanders over its lifetime: Shogo Narahara, Takakazu Kanashi, and Shigeo Kobayashi. It sank 2 warships and 3 merchant ships, and damaged 1 warship and 2 more merchant ships. Its famous exploit was on September 15, 1942, when the I-19, commanded by Takakazu Kanashi, sank the USS Wasp and the USS O'Brien, and damaged the USS North Carolina. The I-19 also assisted with delivering reinforcement troops and the evacuation of Japanese forces on Guadalcanal. Unfortunately, despite its long-range capabilities and advanced torpedoes, the I-19 was limited by the fact that Japanese forces were unable to adapt to Allied forces' anti-submarine detection and destruction tactics. And on November 25, 1943, the I-19 was detected and destroyed by a US destroyer, and all 104 crew members were lost. And just like that, we've come to the end of our video. I don't know about you, but I had a lot of fun plunging into the world of Japanese submarines. If you enjoyed the video as much as we did, check out more of our videos. There are loads of other videos for you to enjoy. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and smash the notification bell so you don't miss out on more fun videos. Till next time.